Hi, David Yout here. In this video, I'm going to show you how you could have earned a Championship Lode Runner completion certificate on the Commodore 64 back in the day with a minimal amount of effort. The first demonstration will be without performing any modifications to the game itself or the computer's RAM or registers. Please be advised that Championship Lode Runner was designed to make permanent modifications to itself when a player beat the game, so the steps I'm going to show you should only be done on a copy of the game unless you know what you're doing. For those not familiar with the Lode Runner series, the game was originally released in the middle of 1983 for the Apple II, Atari 8-bit platforms, and for the Commodore 64. It's a puzzle platform game with 150 levels. The year after its release, Broderbund published Championship Lode Runner. The gameplay mechanics and graphics are the same, but it had 50 deviously crafted levels designed to challenge expert players. To complete a level, the player must collect all the gold and then reach the top of the screen. There are enemy guards to be avoided, and the player can dig holes in the bricks to trap them. Each Championship Lode Runner game came with a victory registration card that had a serial number on it. The game's instructions explained that if you can complete all 50 levels, the game will ask you for this number, then it would generate a password that you could have mailed off to Broderbund. If it all checked out, they would send you a certificate to commemorate your achievement. I maybe got through 8 or so levels back in the day, so I never really got close to completing all 50. But I did find a blog post from a Mr. Neville Ridley Smith who legitimately earned the certificate back in 1988. Apparently Neville hadn't heard of the original game, so he just started with the crazy difficult version. He describes how the software allows you to save your game, but every time you restart from that save, the game takes away a life until you can't use the saved game anymore. It took him 2 years to complete the challenge and mail off his password. In his award package, he got a signed letter from Doug Carlston, who founded Broderbund in 1980 and remained the president until it was acquired by the Learning Company in 1998. Here's the certificate. I'm glad he took the time to blog about this, since this is the only example I've ever seen of the certificate, and it's proof that Broderbund was still making good on these recognitions 4 years after the initial game release. There's a link to the post in the video description, and it's a fun quick read. So when I started to work on this video, it was going to be another code reversing demonstration, and I was going to show how to find the password generator routine, and then show how it works. But while I was preparing this, I discovered that someone had recently posted fully commented assembly source to the game. There's no need for me to duplicate this excellent reversing effort, so we'll be spending time reading this code instead of poking around in memory. There's a link to this repo in the video description below. In the original Lode Runner, there were key commands to skip levels and to add additional lives. If you did this, the game wouldn't allow you to post high scores to the leaderboard. But the Championship Lode Runner manual and game didn't seem to have these options anymore. One of the big findings in the GitHub Commodore 64 disassembly is that there is an undocumented cheat mode you can enter that enables a new set of key combinations that will allow you to skip levels or to add extra lives. Searching online, I wasn't able to find any mention of these secret cheat options, not in any post or any magazine scan, nor for any game system type, only here in this recent disassembly. So maybe it went undiscovered for 4 decades. If you know more, please leave a video comment. Okay, let's start a game and get that certificate password. We'll be looking at code, but this first approach is non-technical and it won't subvert memory or registers in any way. To activate the hidden cheat mode, I first pause the game by pressing run stop, then I press F7, and then I press run stop again to resume the game. Now to skip a level, I just hold down the control key, the Commodore key, the shift key, and I press the 6 key. We can use this to skip 98% of the levels on our way to finishing the game. Let's do that now. And while we're skipping all these levels, I'll show how this cheat is implemented in the source. Here's the routine that checks the keyboard matrix input values during the main game loop. As we saw in the manual, many of the game's input keys also require the control key to be pressed. The code checks if the control is down, and if so, adds the highest order bit to the keyboard matrix value. The keys that issue commands are all in a single table, which is much nicer than being sprinkled throughout the code. The first entry is the run stop key, which pauses the game. You can see that the key press has a matrix value of 3F. I'll add a link in the video comments for a table of these keyboard matrix values. The R key by itself would be hex 11, but here it's hex 91. That's because it requires the control key, and as we saw earlier, the code sets the high bit when this happens. After the keyboard is scanned, it checks to see if the input matches one of the table's values. If so, it looks up the address of the code that handles that particular key input, pushes its entry address onto the stack, and then does an RTS, which pops that address off of the stack and transfers flow to that routine. A nice clean approach. So pressing run stop would take us to the pause handling code. Let's see how that's implemented. We have a busy loop here that will continue until run stop is pressed again to exit. Anytime during that looping, you can press F7 to turn on the cheat mode. When you do, the CL_cheat mode memory address will change from a 0 to a 3, indicating that the cheat mode is on. Okay, back to the key command table. We can see from the code comments that there's key combinations for both incrementing the number of lives and for skipping levels. To skip a level, the key code is hex B6. Subtracting the high bit, which is hex 80, gives hex 36, which is the keyboard matrix value of the up arrow key, which is a shifted 6 key. Let's see how that level skip is implemented. This code has a few early exits in case the cheat conditions aren't met. To get here at all, the Control, Shift, and 6 must be pressed, but this checks to make sure that the command key is being held down as well. The next check is to see if cheat mode is enabled. If control flow passes these checks, we skip a level. This is done by incrementing the level number, then killing the player, since killing the player restarts at the current level number. So to compensate for this approach, it adds a life. In Championship Lode Runner, the cheat system doesn't disable leaderboard updates or the secret password generator. If we search for CL cheat mode, we'll see it only occurs 4 times. Once to initialize the mode at the game's start, once to allow it to be enabled, a 3rd time when attempting to skip a level, and lastly when attempting to add another life. This is in contrast to the original Lode Runner, which maintains a cheated flag that records if cheating options were used. According to this disassembly, Championship Lode Runner borrows lots of code from the original and implements the same cheat detection flag as the original, but then never makes any use of it. All it does is initialize the defaults, and it never gets set to true. Okay, so we skipped through the first 49 levels. If we skip past level 50, it won't offer us the password, it'll just cold boot the game. So if we want to earn our certificate with no memory or register hacking, we're going to need to play level 50. It's a bit challenging to figure out, but it's far easier than having to have completed the preceding 49 levels. I'm starting the level by pressing Ctrl-D to reverse dig direction. While this may sound undesirable, it allows you to dig faster in certain scenarios that this level presents. I've also pressed the minus key twice, which slows the gameplay to half the default game speed. Neither Lode Runner nor Championship Lode Runner consider slowing the game to be cheating. You can still create high scores this way. But no one wants to watch slow gameplay, so I'm using my video editor to return the action to the default speed. However, this is going to make the sound effects sound a bit weird from here on out. At half speed, it's straightforward for me to complete level 50 in a single run, but I'm simply not good enough to do it at normal speed. Here's a neat trick to get over the trapdoor to revisit the left side of the screen. However, if walking over a moving guard's shoulders is too difficult, there's some complicated digging patterns that would have accessed all the gold before moving right of the trapdoor, which I'm not going to show. This next puzzle is a bit tricky. Broderbund sold a hint book which explains what you have to do here, which is dig while you are standing on the shoulders of a guard that is falling. And there it is. When playing at full speed, I can't do this dig without being in the reversed dig direction mode. Okay, we now have access to the other side. There's some easy gold collects here. Much of level 50 is just getting the guards permanently stuck in pits to form bridges. They don't really get a chance to pick up gold. This next dig sequence is complicated. Note the delayed dig here. Which allows this escape. And this corner area is a slightly easier version of what you just saw. Again, we have a delayed dig. And again, it provides our eventual escape here. Now that we have that last guard trapped, we just need to mop up the rest of the gold and level 50 is ours. 3 more to go. Okay, we've done it. Since there were no high scores, I have the top score, which lets me enter a victory message that gets displayed at the game's title page. Then it asks if I want the secret password. I'll say yes, and we enter the serial number. Okay, our password is Croat, which Google tells me means someone from Croatia. I'm going to immortalize this password on my victory registration card. Okay, now it's time to see how that password was chosen. Letters used in the generated passwords come from this table, which as you can see are a concatenation of the words Apple, Commodore, and Atari. And here's how the serial number gets turned into the password. The second and third digits get summed, and then that turns into an index, and a character is retrieved from that table at that index. This is repeated for digits 3 and 4, for digits 4 and 5, and for digits 2 and 5. You can see by the lack of a cross-reference on the first password character here that the letter C will always be the first letter. This is designating a win on a Commodore 64 machine. This varied with platform. Apple II codes start with an A, and the Atari 8-bit codes start with a T. So I'm not sure what CQADI means. Q is not a reachable password letter, at least not in the Commodore 64 implementation. But you may very likely see CQADI appear, and it's time to explain to you why I gave you that warning at the beginning of the video that you should be following these steps on a copy of the game, not your original disc. The game designers didn't want you to try out lots of chosen serial numbers against the password generating code. Let's look at the code input handler. When you enter a valid serial number, a count gets incremented, and this count is stored in the leaderboard. This value is not reset if you use the key command that clears the leaderboard. The label you see here, CL score before serial number count max, is the value of 2. So let's see what happens if I attempt to generate the code 2 more times. Here's the second time I enter my serial number. And here's the third time I enter my serial number. The game has permanently altered itself on disk and will no longer return a valid password to you. Again, this is by design. Okay, so that's what any Commodore 64 user could have done to more easily earn a certificate back in 1984. But Mr. Ridley Smith received his certificate in 1988, and by that time, freezer cartridges were common. The debugging features on these cartridges would have made it far easier to dynamically discover the program flow from the game's main loop to the password generating menu. From that analysis, you could have jumped to the password code in a single step. Let's look at the documented source to figure out how to do this. After the check to make sure the player passed level 50, it proceeds to GitHub line number 5029 that will generate the password you need to earn a certificate. From hunting for a few of these instructions in memory, I found this address to be hex 7566. So let's jump to that address. Here we're running the game while using the Super Snapshot cartridge. Now we just press the freezer cartridge button, and we go to the monitor. Then we'll type in G7566 to change the program counter to 7566 and resume execution there. You can, of course, do this in a Vice emulator as well, going into the monitor and then entering the same syntax G7566. However, if you're using Vice for any of the steps shown in this video, it's important not to trigger a security check in the Championship Lode Runner game. It's easy to do. You may encounter this. If so, you've hit a security feature that checks to make sure players aren't cheating by swapping disks in the middle of a gaming session. Let's see how this works. At the start of each game, the current raster line number is sampled and stored with the leaderboard data on the disk as a unique game session ID. Throughout the game, this sampled value is compared with the value stored on disk, and if they don't match, you'll get the security message. You'll run into this problem on Windows Vice if you dragged the disk image into the Vice screen to boot, instead of using the menu or command line to explicitly mount the disk image. Having to store this value on disk implies that the game shouldn't work at all if the disk is write protected. And sure enough, if you cover the write protect, the game will catch a write error and then will call the game's cold start routine, taking you immediately back to the title screen without telling you why. This is not discussed in the game manual, so I bet it confused a few folks back in the day. So, we saw how the cheat system worked for the Commodore 64 version of Championship Lode Runner. I have no idea if there was an equivalent cheat on the Apple II or Atari 8-bit versions, or the ports that came out later for the Famicom, the Sega SG-1000, or MSX systems. If anyone takes the time to see if those systems have a similar cheat mode, or to see if they generate the password differently, please leave a video comment. And that's all for this one. A big thanks to Pidwit for making the disassembly available, and as always, thank you for watching.